I'd like to now introduce our next speaker, who I hope will also sort of tie into some of those points, but bring a different perspective, which is more the international business perspective. And therefore, I would like to introduce Yao Williams to speak about changing demand in sponsorship, sales, and business development. Yao heads up international business for Athletes First Partners, where he's responsible for commercializing a portfolio of clients, including the NBA, as well as the collective rights of all 450 NBA players. Prior to this, Yao has worked with a number of groups, including the City Football Group across China and Hong Kong, and has also spent time across the Americas. His personal sports career includes stints with the Cleveland Indians, Cleveland Gladiators, Charlotte Bobcats, New York Yankees, and the NBA. So a huge range of experience across multiple events and working with multiple types of content. So I'd like to turn over to Yao. I think we're all very keen to hear what he has to say.
First, just want to thank Brian, Lovey, and the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee for putting on such an insightful event and for having me. When we think about the last 365 days, there's been a couple things that kind of come to mind. How people consume sports was always evolving, but current events have accelerated growth. For example, teams and leagues were dealing with the challenge of, do people go into arenas or stadiums or stay at home and watch it on their big screen? So how do they enhance that experience and give them something that they can't get from the comfort of your own couch, right? Now, currently, people don't feel comfortable going to stadiums, sitting with thousands of people for the obvious reasons. So now, what are you doing to engage those fans and stay top of mind? Another thing we've noticed is the value of athletes has always been accelerated. Has also been accelerated. I have the luxury of working with NBA players and NFL players, but NBA players, I mean, we heard the moniker of "it won't shut up and dribble," right? And that has trickled down to other athletes. But athletes are starting to use their voice, and brands are aware of that more than ever. With the social unrest in the U.S. that's trickled down across various countries as well, brands are being held accountable by their customers, by their consumers. And now they're asking themselves, how can we be more authentic? They recognize that they're trying to reach a certain demographic, but how are they actually helping that demographic survive and thrive? And we've seen this very often, right? Where a certain company or a brand will target a demographic, target a certain community, but is not actually giving to that community. And we've seen aligning with athletes have been the solution if done correct. A lot of that has also been because these athletes have identified that, yes, I'm great at this particular sport, but I'm also passionate about X, whether that is fashion, whether that's financial literacy, etc. From a partnership perspective, to be honest, much hasn't really changed. With the massive caveat of this is more around the tier one properties that we've always focused on solution-based selling, which is simply truly understanding how you're truly going to enhance this brand awareness. How are you helping them separate themselves from their competitors? What does fan engagement actually look like? So I'll provide a couple case studies on what we've seen across various regions and what we're doing to continue to advance. First thing I think that we all have to recognize and figure out is what's your values, whether you're the brand, property, or athlete, and how does that align with your potential partner? In addition, what are you offering that they can't get anywhere else? So one example that immediately comes to mind is middle of COVID, every league in the US is trying to salvage their season. And the NBA decided to create a bubble in Disney in Florida with pretty strict protocols. Fortunately, nobody got sick. Probably a couple people say past curfew, but all in all, it was a massive success. And again, this is also in the middle of all the social unrest within the U.S. And Budweiser is or AB InBev is a partner of the NBA. They also are a partner of the National Basketball Players Association, which is the union for the NBA. And with the past president of the U.S., most people were tired of him and tired of the environment, tired of the situation. And instead of complaining, the simple answer was, hey, go vote. So Budweiser, aside from pushing their product, began to push the statement and slogan of pushing people to go vote. And this was something that was unique because they quickly understand what was important to their partner and what was important to the athletes. From a creative side, we recognize that virtual appearances are now the reality. We're here right now, right? And there was a partnership with Michelob Ultra, which is a beer company, which is owned by Anheuser-Busch, and they partnered with Top Golf, which is kind of a venue in the U.S. It's kind of fun, where you can play golf and play games and things of that nature, and with Facebook Live, and also with the NBPA, with various NBA players, where these players are beyond being, and this goes back to what I was sharing earlier, beyond being avid basketball players and fans of their own game, they're great at other sports. So now you have these guys commentating. So and I use that to say you have to be a bit creative in these times, right? Beyond just the typical standard that you've been accustomed to. And another example was Ben and Jerry's. Ben and Jerry's ice cream. We all know it. We all love it. It's amazing. Everything that was going on last year, they were the first few brands that were standing up, and it didn't seem fake. It seemed extremely authentic, because you have them speaking about Black Lives Matter unapologetically. And then fast forward, then they partner with Colin Kaepernick, where he has his own ice cream. So again, just thinking outside the box. And I don't know if we would have saw that 3 years ago or 2 years ago, but it shows that constant ability to having to adapt and adjust. Things that also come to mind is there's a massive luxury of working with any Olympic committee. You literally represent the best athletes, every major sport from your country. So how do you enable brands to speak to that audience in an authentic manner? So when you think about categories that have a propensity to spend within sports, and whether that is beverage, apparel, auto, how are you telling the right stories, and how is it then amplified to the athletes' channels? So example, we currently work with the United States Olympic and Paralympic properties, and we worked with them to build a program called the Athlete Marketing Platform. So simply what this is, it's first share what the two objectives and challenges were. For Team USA, their major focus is, okay, LA 28 is coming. We typically sell on the quad, so we typically sell every 4 years. We want to sell for the next 7 years. How do we show value to a brand, to a CMO, besides having an amazing sales group? But how do we show value to them to say, hey, look, instead of you spending this amount, you should be spending this amount of money. On the other end, you have athletes that are, again, literally the best at their sport in their country, that are true amateurs, that are working part-time jobs, but also training. So how are they finding new revenue opportunities? So the Athlete Marketing Platform, it was created for two things. First, providing passive assets to the partner, meaning simply now when you do a deal with Team USA, you receive access to the 5 rings, you receive access to Team USA marks, but you also receive images from the athletes. And obviously there's 1,000 caveats to protect the NGB, so you can't use three men and women that are on track and field, right? Like, so you have to pick 3 different sports, you have to include a Paralympian and things of that nature. But it allows them to now use those athletes, of course, with the athlete's approval. The positive for the athlete is now you're in this database where now top brands around the world can use your likeness. And then more importantly, now Visa can say, hey, no, we actually want to do a social campaign. We actually want to pick this archer. We actually want to pick this bobsledder. And they can click on you. You can share your rate, and now you have incremental revenue. So again, just recognizing this is something that was a challenge on both ends that hopefully, if done correctly, can be a massive solution for both parties. So the key takeaways, one is building your brand and having an interactive discussion with your fans and with your consumers. They want to know what your athletes are doing. They want to know how they're training. Heck, they want to know how they're coping. Mental health is real. All of us been stuck in a room or stuck in a house. How are you dealing with that? And people want to see your authentic self. So as you share that, fans will begin to watch, which then will translate to brands will begin to pay attention. The second thing is building out assets that actually make sense. Again, virtual, digital isn't going anywhere. Build out innovative ideas that align with the times. So, and also, how are you double downing on building the right content and sharing the right story? Third thing that was mentioned a few times this morning, being flexible. If you don't know how to adapt, you're going to be left to the wayside, right? Doing a deeper due diligence around what a brand is looking for, why are they looking for it, and how can you help them achieve it. That's how you build long-lasting partnerships and hopefully generate more revenue for your business. Other thing is telling the athlete's story aside from what they do, and telling that story and telling the story of that property aside from from the sport. For example, if a sports team has heavy involvement within the community, telling that story. One thing that the National Basketball Players Association focuses on is telling the athlete's story outside of the game of basketball. One thing they mention is there's 48 minutes in a game. Their focus, and there's obviously 24 hours in a day, their focus is the 23 hours and 12 minutes of their lives. How do we tell those stories? And when you think about that, it actually sounds massive. So if they're big into fashion, let's share that story. If they're big into fintech, what can we do and how can we align with the brand? So again, the fintech example, you have a guy that's focused on that, or a woman that's focused on that, and now you have a authentic conversation with the bank on saying, hey, we know you're running financial literacy. We think he's the perfect fit, and this is why. Because this is actually authentic and true to who he is and to his brand, to what his brand is. So in conclusion, we recognize that these are challenging times, but also extremely exciting times to be innovative and creative. One thing I heard last year, I said, this is going to put real marketers to the test. You say you're a marketer, let's see what you're really made of, because there's no free handouts right now. You have to be edge to cut through the clutter.
In an authentic way, tap into that and also define our own niche within that, and also support the athletes to tell their stories. So thank you, Yao. I think that that actually is a wonderful segue to our first panel, which we're very excited to go into: monetizing of sports assets, pathway to building a sustainable sports industry. I think that we can quite flatly say that we're starting from scratch in Trinidad and Tobago. Obviously, of course, there has been a lot. There has been a tremendous amount of work that has been put in by the sporting community. But the plain fact of the matter is that the cash has not yet followed. The investment has not yet followed. We have not been able to tap into the investment, despite the fact that the government has supported sports tremendously. We have a very high standard of infrastructure, physical infrastructure in particular. The challenge has now been, okay, how can we actually tap the investments that we've made and actually tap international investments and tell that story in a compelling way to be able to do so. So I'd like to introduce our panelists to talk a little bit more about it. Christina Savaida, forgive me as I butcher your name, but is the Senior Operations Manager at the International Tech Ball Federation, and has been working for a long time throughout Europe, leading the Hungarian Football Federation, amongst other things, the member of the committee of the First Division clubs, secretary of the Women's Committee, and working very much, she's also worked in B2B sales in Adidas. So very much across both the club side, also as an athlete, and in addition as an economist. Heather Morse is a 4-time Olympian and 2-time Olympic gold medalist, a multi-sport athlete and highly respected motivational speaker. Heather has competed internationally in track cycling, rugby, and bobsledge, in which she and her teammate won gold medals at Vancouver and Sochi. She's been inducted into the World Rugby Hall of Fame and is now an occupational therapist, author, coach, and mentor. And so, yeah, they will be joining Yao in monetize assets, which is what is our niche? What is our comparative advantage? What is the competitive advantage that you see Trinidad having, and perhaps the region more broadly? What kind of stories do you think we can tell? And I'd like to start first actually with Christina, and then we'll move to Heather and Yao on that.
Yes, thank you. I'm really honored to sit here with you. And as Zhao has mentioned, and this that around here and which are experiences. As mentioned, I'm coming from very different level of experiences, being myself an athlete and coming from different types of sports. I do believe that the issue is here, and naturally being in charge also of competitions, my main focus, the heart of each and every activity any of us here in this room, is always the athlete, is always those who are dedicating their lives to a certain sport. In this way, our sport, tech ball, is really unique. If I may say, we are so young and so flexible at this age, or distancing sport, meaning we are using football skills around the curved table, which gives the exact distance between two players or four athletes, which is perfectly safe. So what I would encourage everyone, especially those who are involved in this discussion, is to analyze your own role and find those advantages or find those new game changer ideas that you can bring to the table, because it's not only thinking outside the box, but our reality for now is living outside the box. Maybe we will never go back in there, and that's what you need to prepare yourself for. From the financial point of view, and naturally this is the biggest issue for each of us, even if we do not mention it in detail. We need to seek for very unique and new sources, because those that we already knew, talking about ticket sales and broadcasting, I'm sure will not work, not in the midterm and maybe not on the long term anymore as we used to know them. So what I actually could add to this conversation is embrace this change or embrace this challenge to analyze and reinvent yourself. I am saying it easily because, as said, we are a very young sport, but still we are very ambitious, and I believe we could make ourselves, let's say, living with this COVID situation pretty well, meaning we have around 50 competitions till June from now, and only in March we have 20 competitions going on, meaning we did a little research. Naturally, we did parallel to this a concept and an educational framework through which all our organizers and all our partners are able to deliver competitions online, and as well as our colleagues and our partners, let's say NFs, clubs, whatsoever, who join us, team up with us on these online competitions due to educational courses. So again, what we did is to analyze and rethink, reinvent ourselves. So this is my biggest suggestion for all of you to follow.
Okay, so yeah, so really sort of get into that deep dive and say, okay, what niche are we going to get into? What is stories are we going to tell? Heather, I find it very interesting that you've actually, I mean, very few people have competed in a high level at even one of the sports that you've been involved in, but I find it very interesting that you've done cycling, you've done rugby, you've done bobsled. I mean, like it's very interesting, and I think this ties in. You know, we're a small country, right? We're in a region with lots of other small states, right? How can we find the sports that, okay, we're going to select this niche and give it our all, as opposed to maybe trying to sort of fight in highly competitive markets against other places which have way more investment, which have had much more time to think about and build their brand. I mean, what would you do?
Hi, everybody. I just want to say good morning. It's so great to be here. Just a little bit about myself. I know there was that introduction, but I was born and raised in the smallest province in Canada. So on an island on the East Coast, Prince Edward Island. So I am used to island living, and I lived in Trinidad for almost 3 years. So it is such a pleasure to be back and involved with doing something with Trinidad and Tobago. And so I too am a little more personally familiar with your situation as a country and what it's like to live there, and I have to say I miss it. So it's really, really a pleasure to be back here. Anyway, that's thank you so much for that introduction. It's like I said, it's a pleasure to be here. And I do come with a pretty unique a story, unique experience with not only competing at those high levels in 3 sports, but the fact that I didn't start training for elite sport and taking it seriously or lifting weights until I was 27. So all of that stuff happened after I was 27 years old. So it's a little bit, I come from a bit of a different perspective from a lot of athletes and Olympians who have kind of pushed their way to the top. You asked a couple of questions there. I'm gonna try and break those down, or feel free to throw in the questions if I forgot some of them. But at first you were talking about unique stories from Trinidad and Tobago and what unique stories you could tell there. You kind of tap into branding and getting those assets out there. And I think as an island, you have a little more ability to potentially control that coronavirus because you are an island. Now, that is at a government level, obviously, and certain decisions in that sense. But if you look at stories that are coming from Australia and New Zealand, and even though we're not a country here in Prince Edward Island, we're still an island. And they have been able to monitor and change the, I guess, the protocols of travel into the island and who they allow in and what that is for. So potentially that is an opportunity for you to highlight advancements and wins, shall we say, like really good wins in terms of numbers and being able to have self-contained sporting events and that sort of things within your country, which is actually probably a really great approach. And then promoting those wins and promoting the things that are happening right there in Trinidad and Tobago. Also here in Prince Edward Island it was the end of last summer, I guess, for us. So August, September, Prince Edward Island hosted a massive football tournament here. And again, it was a bit controversial at first with a lot of islanders because family members weren't even allowed to come, but all of a sudden they're bringing all these footballers in. And it was all around protocol and the testing that had to happen to the athletes prior to arriving. As soon as they arrived, they were all quarantined in a bubble for 6 weeks. They were all contained, all in one hotel and bused to and from one location, and everything, even the service providers and even the media people who came from all across the country, all of them were all quarantined in this bubble, similar to what Yao was talking about in terms of at Disney World, with all those athletes all quarantined in a bubble. So certain things like that are certainly, I think, possible, especially for an island like Trinidad and Tobago. And I think that's actually something that's quite exciting to think about, those possibilities. And then tapping on what Christina said in terms of technology, that's not going anywhere. And so it really is an opportunity to amp up those individual stories of athletes and connecting those stories with brands and really promoting that stuff online. And we just have to look at that in terms of self-promotion, which self-promotion is somewhere where I lack, I think, and we all have our strong suits and self-promotion is not mine. But that being said, if you have partners with like the TTOC and people who will help with that, I mean, athletes are trained to train like that. Their job is to compete, and that's what their goals are. It's hard for athletes to necessarily feel like they have to be good in everything, and we can't expect them to be good in their own marketing and their own, even though we wish we were good at everything. And this is a digital world. It is certainly not something that comes naturally to an athlete to know how to self-promote and to know how to align and to know those things. So I think that guidance is really important for athletes. And then the last question that you asked me was, what was it, Kieran?
No, sure. It was about our niche, and I think I mean you touched on that a bit, but like in terms of the specific sports as well. I mean, what do you see as like potential comparative advantage?
Yeah, so with niching, I mean, I've never been a big believer in specialization, and especially with kids, I feel like specializing too early creates a lot of injuries. And I know there are a lot of it's difficult in certain markets and in certain areas to not specialize because of the social and pressure within federations. But I don't love the idea of specialization early. Obviously, I never did since I competed in 3 sports at the international level. But I think in terms of discovering the strengths of athletes, often athletes will go into a sport simply because that's in their immediate environment. And that's what they're, just is what is hosted there. And they're not necessarily exposed to or even realize some of the sports that are available to them that may actually be more suited to their actual physical abilities. And so in Canada, we have something that just started, well, I guess it's been a number of years now, but something after my time, though I did not take part in this, but called the RBC Training Ground. And that is a program that's sponsored by RBC, one of the banks here in Canada. And it's called the Training Ground. And so athletes come and it's almost like a general combine. It's a general recruiting center. It's a general combine where they're put through a bunch of activities and testing and all of this stuff. And they have recruiters there from different sports who are actually looking at their physical abilities and seeing, and they're all their markers and all of their testing results and suggesting and offering up development in certain sports, which they themselves seem to be attuned to. That might be a sport that they may never have thought of before. And so it's a really interesting way for some athletes to potentially discover something else that they will elevate to a higher level in. If they chose to switch sports. So, I mean, some people are playing a sport because they love that sport. Other people are playing sports because they want to see if they can reach the higher level. So it really depends on the intention and the goals of each individual athlete, but that's an opportunity to find out about where they fit.
Right. So we need to do that analysis. That's for sure. So Yao, I mean, I think that that you framed this panel very well earlier on. So what would you do? Let's say Minister Cudjoe came to you and said, listen, I want you to sort this out and make brand TT. I mean, like, what story would you tell?
Yeah, I think that the first question I would ask, what is TT, right? Like, what is your brand? What is that story? What is your ethos? What are your values? What do you care about? What's most important, et cetera, right? And I think once you identify that, then you first off stand firm on what that is. And then you can also begin to look at, okay, how do we begin to tell stories that match those values, that match what was important to us, et cetera. And then from there, finding brands and partners that align with those values. So I think it's overly simplified, of course, but I think it's literally that simple. You start from understanding who you are, telling that story, now finding people that align with that story. And that's the same process that you do from a social perspective when you think about fan engagement. It's like, okay, I'm an athlete, but I also want to tell people how nice I dress. Okay, great. So let me start, aside from me sharing videos about me training, and fast forward, now you have a deal with an apparel partner, or now you have a deal with a.
Yeah, so that is definitely one of those things. I'm already thinking about it, and it's a very, very, very difficult, because it's a huge exercise. I know Brian in particular has been one of those that has been sort of really leading the charge to narrow that down. And I know many in the government as well. I think Minister Rambara touched on it earlier on. Are really thinking, okay, well, how do we tie that into the broader brand TT as well? So that is definitely very key. I'd like to, because I know we're a bit over in terms of time, I'd like to very quickly just give you guys, throw these out to the panel in general. You can decide who'd like to take it. Just a couple of audience questions, and then we can move to the next panel. We have a few questions here. One of them is that what do you think are the long-term implications of sport, of the massive? I mean, by necessity, right? Sport has had to sort of be not put on the back burner, so to speak, but the reality is we haven't been able to do it because of COVID, right? So everything has plunged. What are the long-term implications of this? I mean, what do you see it? And any of you can decide which of you would like to take that question.
Well, I can start, I guess. Well, Christina, you can go ahead.
No. Let's discuss it. It's a chat. It's all okay.
Yeah, I think that and this is with zero understanding and knowledge and background on what's been done so far to possibly start sports again, if that even makes sense. But I mean, the implications could be challenging, especially if you're doing absolutely nothing. So I assume people are still training, of course. I assume that from a business perspective, content is still being created. You're still filming, and you're still producing. And obviously, I know even film crews is a challenge, right, because of social distancing. So we've even created, and you talk about, Christina mentioned this earlier, of just being innovative and being nimble. I mean, we send out kind of production kits to athletes and kind of give them a quick tutorial on how to run their own content. Hey, here's a certain light, here's a certain this, here's a certain that, and here's your lines, and they can produce it. We saw something recently. There was a Pepsi commercial digitally with Pogba from United, Messi, and Sancho from Dortmund. So it's still possible to still do things. I just think that I just feel like there needs to be, of course, a plan. And unfortunately, I'm unable to really speak about intelligently because I don't know what's been done so far.
Yeah, so as for competitions, I wanted to share with you, let's say, a practice or an idea, if I may say, and this is not coming from football, which is my background, and not coming from tech ball, which happens to be my life for a while now, but it comes from running. And being an athlete, I believe all of you have run shorter or longer distances whatsoever. But I became a fan of an application in which I could sign up, naturally paid, let's say, a smaller amount, and getting into a community which uses the same application, collecting kilometers or miles. It's up to you, naturally, into the country where are you located. So whichever makes more sense for you. And collecting these kilometers or miles, you could get a certain milestone and receive your own jersey. You could receive your own medal whatsoever. And naturally, this is a way for those who created this application to raise money by just a simple application, which was, I believe, made in 1 or 2 weeks for those who did running anyway. But before this application, I never paid for it. It was free. And what I am paying for right now is not, again, running, which I could do for free, but the feeling to be part of a community, to feel the challenge that I need to succeed even over myself or anyone else I can challenge. And this is an added value we need to think. So I would embrace or encourage anyone, any entity, to come up with such ideas, thinking outside the box, because the money is still there. We need to financialize ourselves, whether we are clubs, NFs, IFs, or simple athletes that needs to earn a living. We need to find solutions and ideas that have never been there. But for that, we can work on the basis that we already knew, the experiences and the ideas that worked before, but maybe in life. Now, the digital platform is here, internet is here, applications are here. So all we need to do is basically puzzle these up and find new sources, because I do believe that they are going to stay with us for a long time.
And I would just say, in terms of the long-term implications of sports kind of being put to the side, if we're talking about individual athletes, I mean, it's going to be, I wouldn't say being put on the back burner as advantage, but last year when the Olympics ended up being postponed, there was a lot in the media, and I was doing a number of interviews because people were wondering what athletes were going through and what a shame, and all of these athletes. And I said, well, it's not going to be good for some athletes who were ready and 100% ready and at the top of their game for those Olympics. But it's going to be an advantage for somebody else who maybe was recovering from injury and now has an extra year to recover. So really, it's a downfall for some, and it's positive for others. And I think the more sports gets pushed, maybe fortunately or unfortunately, I mean, we even said we assume that athletes are still training right now to be ready for when they're able to compete. And I think that for some of the athletes, I mean, this in and of itself will kind of reveal who is in it for the long haul and who is potentially, not quite doesn't have the perseverance or doesn't quite have it to kind of go through. And yes, it is unfortunate for some of those athletes who wanted to compete in that moment, but this is really going to kind of, I think, separate and really elevate some athletes, and will be a really great opportunity for them. And unfortunately, some of the others will fall off. And so in terms of the implications, it's going to be good for some and not good for others in terms of just the specific athlete.
Yeah, I think I love that perspective, Heather, because we don't hear that. It's very common in the media simply to hear, okay, the bottom's dropped out of the market, it's a disaster. So that's a very interesting take and very, very important and relevant. I'd like to just ask, thank you all so much. I'm sorry we're a little behind on time, so I would just ask each of you to sort of make very brief concluding points. But in those concluding points, if you can just state what is the one thing that we need to do in order to monetize our sports assets? What is the one single thing that you would recommend? So Heather?
The one single thing to monetize sporting assets?
Yes.
Listen to Yao. That's what I would say. No, I'm just kidding. Well, I'm not kidding, but it's hard to say one single thing because every federation and every athlete are going to be dealing with different things and having different assets and different things to work with. I would say to monetize it is about being clear, being really clear about your brand and what you stand for beyond just the athlete in which you compete or for which you compete. And I think that in and of itself is probably the most important thing, is being clear on who you are as a person, not just as an athlete, and aligning yourselves with the messaging that goes along with that, and moving that forward in your online platforms.
Fantastic. Thank you, Heather. Christine?
Yes, it's pretty hard just to stick to one single word, and I also won't be able to do that. But this is the biggest truth. Know yourself, know your values, regardless of the fact if you are an athlete. You also have to know your own community. Your community has massive assets to be marketed, worked out, and put out there. Because believe me, if you find the right routes, the right options for you that could work, regardless of how COVID goes on, they will stay with you. So it's worth investing, not even in the midterm, but on the long run. And I think this is something important. So if I would take this single note with myself home today is: know yourself, know your strength, know your community, and know your goals, which is something we haven't mentioned yet. But you need to see the whole pathway in front of you, even as an athlete, even as an NF, an IF, because if you know the road and you know the goal you wish to reach, it's much easier to recalibrate or reinvent yourself accordingly. That would be my suggestion.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Christina. And Yao?
I would echo exactly what Heather and what Christina shared. I think in addition to that is one thing that we've done, and we've done it even globally. I'm typically on a plane every few weeks. I haven't been on a plane since February 24th, 2020. Which is crazy to even say out loud. But we've done virtual road shows. So is exactly what Heather and what Christina mentioned, once you understand your values, your goals, your community, now sharing that, now going to different brands and sharing that story. And sometimes it's just a quick check-in on, hey, this is what has been going on over the last 365 days. We've been doing this, we've been doing this, we've been doing that. Hey, because people are going to ask, how are you guys thinking about the Olympics? What if the Olympics is postponed again? Or what about this? And as long as you're having a story and a certain cadence to that and a rhythm to that, I think that's something that now you begin to brainstorm, become creative on, hey, how can we partner together to achieve both of our objectives? Because as sports is running through their challenges, companies are running through their challenges, right? So everybody needs help. So heck, I'm going to share what we're doing, what's been new, what's been different, how we're thinking about things in alternative ways that we've never thought about it before. What are you guys doing? Great. Well, let's figure out how we can work together. So those are my quick thoughts.
Excellent. No, thank you very much. Thank you, Yao. Thank you to the whole panel. I think that was absolutely fantastic, and definitely a lot to think about and a lot to do, particularly for athletes and sporting organizations. So okay, we've focused a bit on how that we need to build our brand and develop our narrative. But once we've built the brand and developed the narrative, what next? How do we get it out there? Which I think quite neatly segues into our next panel, which is embracing the lean forward sports experience. Is over the top and video on demand, are those the answers?